Well, thank you for tuning in to the Center for Christian Research. I really appreciate you tuning in and listening to what I have to say. Um, this one's a short one, but it's very interesting indeed because it's some things I've learned lately about Jesus and his followers when he called his original disciples to himself. There were some things in there that never really made sense to me logically. And we're going to go over that. But first, we're going to get started. The closest disciples to Jesus were, of course, Peter and John. Peter had his brother Andrew. They were working a fishing business on the Sea of Galilee. And if you've paid attention, archaeologists believe they have found Peter's residence on what was the old shore of the Sea of Galilee because it's actually gone kind of moved away, but the house was right on the shore. It's rather a large home, and it's purported to be Peter's residence. It's a large home, all right? Poor people don't live on the water, okay? That's what a lot of folks assume, that these disciples were poor. No, they were very good money makers. Fishermen today make good money, and they were fishermen. They were feeding the population. They had a fishing business, and naturally, for their time, they made good money, and they were considered the new money, okay? And if you take a look at Israelite society in the first century, back at that time when Peter, Andrew, James, and John had their business, and when Jesus came on the scene, your old money was back up in the hills of Jerusalem in those big mansions where the Pharisees and the Sadducees had all their big, rich, opulent places, the elite of Jewish society. Well, Peter and Andrew and James and John were not elite. They were the new money, but they were the new business owners with an active business. And going back to the thing that doesn't make sense is, if you recall, when Jesus promises them, I'm going to make you a fisher among men, come and follow me. And the Bible says immediately they dropped their nets and followed Jesus. Okay? That's what I was kind of like, wow. They just, in Peter's case, he left his father and brothers behind, and he and Andrew went on with Jesus in what they considered a chance of a lifetime. And it was. And here's where this particular one, the rubber meets the road, is let's take a look at Israelite society back then in the first century. It was like, and let me start out and preface it by today. What is every boy's little dream when he's growing up? He wants to be the president. He wants to be a famous sports figure. He wants to be a basketball pro, okay? Well, every young Jewish boy in first century Israel, they wanted to become part of the religious elite. That was the crest of society, were the religious elite, the Pharisees, okay? And you would get accepted, you would get sponsored, your family had to have some money and know some people, and you had to go through studies and actually have the Torah memorized in your head, and then you could apply to be picked up by a teacher. Okay, these teachers were kind of like schools. This teacher was the head of this school. For instance, the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul was a very notable Pharisee himself, because he was lucky enough to fall into the school of Gamaliel. Gamaliel was one of the premier teachers. Okay, it was like, it's like you got a chance to go to Harvard, and when you come out of that's Ivy League schooling under Gamaliel, and that's why Paul was extremely well educated. He came out of a very good school. And consequently, as an aside, that's why when he became an author of the New Testament, it really lends credence to why he put everything together. He knew the Torah of Judaism, and he also was a disciple of Jesus Christ. And that's how the New Testament, he wrote most of the New Testament because of his schooling. Paul was very, very educated in Judaism and the Torah, the law. So, it makes sense now. It's every young Jewish boy's dream to go and and get to an Ivy League school like under Gamaliel and become a big religious leader in the society. You're at the very top. But then when most Jewish boys figure out they're not going to make that grade, they'll go into a trade or something. And in the case of our 4 disciples here, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, they ended up in fishing, which was a great way to make money. It was a hard work, but you know what? It was a great way. They made a good living. And if you take a look at their homes, they were right on the water. These people were not poor. They were actually quite intelligent businessmen. Well, and remember, in the back of their mind, it's every Jewish boy's dream to go, okay? So when Jesus comes around, he is already recognized as a prominent religious teacher. He's just juxtaposed to the religious elite, the establishment at the time. But that's why when they knew Jesus, they were aware of his teaching. And when he came up and said, look, you're going to come follow me, that's why the Bible says immediately they dropped their nets. Because it's a dream realized from what they were taught as young children, that they were now able to leave this business behind, have faith in Jesus, and they were going to go and be doing the same things as, say, like what our congressional leaders do. If you had a chance to actually go and be among Congress in some form, you would consider giving up your business too, because it's just it's a noble and an honorable thing to do. So that is kind of like a little insight that I was taught into the first century Israelite culture. And it cleared up for me how these guys, when Jesus, I assume that Jesus was like a nobody on the scene. He comes up to them and they're like, sure, I'll follow you. No, they already know who he was. And it fit into this structure of their society where it was a chance of a lifetime. They dropped their nets. They showed faith. And they're immortalized in the greatest book that was ever written, the Bible. And those 4 were his closest disciples. So hopefully this gave you a little understanding into what's going on back then. It's all about context. And once you learn these little things and you go back and read it, it jumps out of the book at you and is rich and full. And, well, like they say, there's life in those words. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. God bless and have a great day. Thank you.